Karl Marx said if he could sum up communism in one sentence, it would be, quote, abolition of private property, unquote. This is the issue, and I am the Ghetto Man. Today's issue, Communism Part 2, the first plank of the Communist Manifesto, the abolition of all rights to private property, serf-master relationship, leftist Democrat, communist agenda. Don't go away, we'll be right back. Karl Marx said, if he could sum up communism in one sentence, that sentence would be, quote, abolition of private property, unquote. He also said, quote, that we communists have been reproached with the desire of abolishing the rights to personally acquiring property as the fruit of a man's own labor, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence, unquote. Karl Marx also said, quote, the communists are further reproached with desiring to abolish countries and nationalities. Now, doesn't that sound familiar? Isn't that what we're seeing and hearing right now? We call it globalism. He also said, quote, the communist revolution is the most radical rupture with traditional property relations. No wonder that its development involves the most radical rupture with traditional ideas, unquote. This brings us to the first plank of the Communist Manifesto, which is the abolition of property and land and the application of all rent in land for public purposes. Let's look at the definition of property as it was understood by our nation's founders. And in order to do that, we have to go to Bovier's Law Dictionary. Now, Bovier's Law Dictionary was sanctioned by Congress as the official terms and definitions of the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. Property, the right and interest which a man has in land and chattels to the exclusion of others. The sole and despotic dominion which one man claims and exercises over the external things of the world in total exclusion of the right of any other individual in the universe. The first and greatest property right is the right to own oneself. A conscious thinking human being in charge of his or her own destiny, unhindered by any human authority. The right to self-ownership is the foundation to all personal freedom and wealth. The right to acquire property is an extension of that right. Property is an extension of the person. Property and the person are one and the same. The two are inseparable. All material wealth comes from the land. Everything we eat, wear, drive, and live in comes directly from the land. Without private property ownership, there can be no personal, economical, or national freedom. We don't have private property ownership in the USA anymore. Instead, we have allowed our servant federal government to take complete control of all private property and state public land in the United States. When it comes to land in the United States today, we practice a foreign and alien ideology. We practice the first plank of the Communist Manifesto, the abolition of property and land and the application of all rent and land for public purposes. For all intent and purposes, there is no private property ownership in the USA anymore. Nothing that you possess belongs to you. Let's go back to Bovier's Law Dictionary and take a look at the word license. All right, let's take a look at the definition of a license. A permission, a right given by some competent authority to do an act which without such authority would be illegal, or a tort or a trespass. So a license is used to do that which is otherwise illegal. Nothing that you possess is owned by you, not one single thing. It's all owned by the government, and it's done through taxation and fees. It was once said, the power to tax is the power to destroy. And because we no longer practice Article 1, Section 8 and 10 of the United States Constitution, we don't even own the clothes on our back. Why? We don't have any property rights to our nation's money. Now, we'll discuss this fact when we cover the second and the fifth plank of the Communist Manifesto. We, the people, have become nothing more than government property and tenants on our own land. And like all tenants, we are required to pay rent, we call it a tax, to the owner, the government, for the use of our own land. And if you don't pay the rent or use a fee, the owner, government, will evict you and put another good little serf on it that will. In some of the larger cities, this has been expanded to the point that property owners have no say whatsoever in how their property is to be used. Nothing can be done on any piece of real estate in the United States without first getting your government's master's permission. Permits are required for all improvements on private property under penalty of law. Just try to do some home improvement on your home without getting the government permission and see what happens. The government controls and taxes and charges fees on every aspect of American life. Personal consumer taxes and fees, things like the federal income tax, state income tax, local income tax, employee Social Security tax, employee Medicare tax, property taxes, road toll charges, sales tax, driver's license renewal fees, federal telephone surtaxes, state telephone excise taxes and surcharges, gas and electric bill fees, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. Sports statement tax, court case filing fees, goes on and on and on. I mean, I'm right here. I've got a list of over 100, and there just isn't any way that I can read them all, so I've put them up beside me here. All of these taxes and fees render a citizen's rights to freely occupy, possess, and control personal private property as the owner sees fit. Even rents are controlled in some states and cities now. Now, following the definition of property in Bovier's Law Dictionary, a true property owner holds his or her property in a loyal freehold fee simple title, which means, as we read earlier, property that is owned and is independent of any superior landlord, land which is held and is owned in the total exclusion of any other individual in the universe. And that includes government. It is the landlord, the property owner, the landlord, who charges the fee for the use of the land, not the government charging you a fee to use your land. It is the landowner that has a constitutionally protected right to all the benefits and increases derived from the fruits of his or her labor, chattels, and real property. Now, did you notice that I used the word increase and not the word income? I did that for a reason, because there's a difference between an increase and income. And I will explain the difference when we review the second and fifth plank of the Communist Manifestos, the income tax and corporate central bank. If anyone is going to charge a fee for the use of their land or other personal property, it will be the owner of the property that charges the fee, period. Our servant government's job is to protect our property rights and to expand on those rights whenever possible, not to curtail them by unconstitutionally reducing them to a privilege that must be purchased from the government, likened to a serf on the king's land. Now, pursuant to the mandates of the U.S. Constitution, government is established to serve we the people, not the other way around. Today, government servants use the U.S. Constitution as a doormat. They wipe their feet on it, making a mockery out of the visions of our nation's founders by imposing every vile and disgusting unconstitutional regulation, tax, and fee that they can come up with to control and steal a citizen's property. Washington, D.C., the D.C. stands for District of Criminals, has completely corrupted our constitutional republic. Now, the Constitution doesn't permit the federal government from owning and or controlling state land, and that includes private property rights like mineral rights, water rights, grazing rights, or any other right guaranteed and protected under the Constitution. Does the U.S. Constitution allow the federal government to own property? Yeah, it allows them to own property, but it's extremely limited and only for a specific purpose. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 16 reads as follows: to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district, not exceeding 10 miles square, as may, by cession of particular states and the acceptance of Congress, become the seat of the government of the United States, and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislator of the state in which the same shall be, for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. The Constitution only authorizes Washington, D.C., 10 square miles of land only. No more. 10 square miles. The Constitution only allows the U.S. government to purchase land for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings within a state. Nothing else. And the U.S. government has to get the state's permission to purchase said property. You just can't up and take it like they are doing now through the abuse of unconstitutional eminent domain laws. Federal land, national parks, BLM, Forest Service, etc., they are all unconstitutional. The land and its resources belong to the states and to the sovereign citizens who live in those states. The federal government cannot usurp powers not specifically enumerated in the Constitution. It is unconstitutional for the federal government to own, possess, and control the so-called federal land, let alone charge the citizens of the United States for the use of it. It is also unconstitutional for the federal government to manage and charge fees for mining, farming, water, grazing, mineral, or any other inalienable constitutionally protected private property right. These resources belong to the state, and they also belong to the citizens of that state. The state can, through its citizens, charge use fees for certain public lands, providing that the monies are used for the benefit of the people of the state. The state cannot charge fees to a private property owner for the use of resources and mineral rights that are owned by the property owner. The only time that the state has the authority to prohibit what a property owner does with his or her land is when there's a violation of somebody else's life, liberty, or property, which can be settled in a court of law by due process of law. Here's an example. A neighbor that is dumping wastewater upstream in a waterway that runs through both properties. The neighbor has no right to pollute the water that runs through your property. What do? You take the problem to court. You prove that he's violating some life, liberty, or property of yours. There's a ruling, either by a judge or a jury. Problem solved. We don't need the government regulating the problem. Free people have a responsibility to solve their own problems. Today, through regulation, fees, and taxation, the United States government, along with state government, has abolished all rights to private real property, abolished all personal rights to chattel, tangible and intangible. All public state land is controlled, and most of it's controlled by the federal government. The federal government now claims ownership of this land and all of its resources. It rents, sells, and charges fees for the use of this land, mostly to corporate interest, while reassuring the American people that it's doing so, quote, for public purposes, unquote. Exactly like the first plank of the Communist Manifesto calls for. Communism always appeals to the intellectual moral leper, emotional idiots that continually fall for the same old from each according to his ability and to each according to his needs trick. And they fall for it every single time. Have we become the land of the free and the home of the slave? I am the Ghetto Man. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned. My next video will be on the second plank of the Communist Manifesto. And remember, if you are politically correct, then you're legally wrong. And if you're not part of the solution, then you are the problem. Please subscribe to my channel and please share.